you can make changes by voicing your opinion, I believe. And right now, people are complaining that the wrestling in jiu-jitsu is boring. The reason that wrestling is boring in jiu-jitsu is because you're not wrestling back, right? Like wrestling starts when you push back. That's what Andy Saris, my coach, always used to say. Now, if we shift to our focus to having these zone rules, imagine what'll happen, right? You're not allowed to run out of bounds. You're not allowed to just, imagine if somebody gets a single leg and you try to pull them out of bounds, you're passive. You're fucking going down now. You're going into loose turtle. Can you imagine that? That would be awesome. That would change the sport fundamentally. You stall 5 times, you're fucking out of here. If you don't want to wrestle, you don't want to do jujitsu, then get off the mat. You get back position. You get to start on somebody's back. Hell yeah. That would change everything because now all of a sudden you would start wrestling pretty hard because if you get hit for stalling, your ass goes down. Hey, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to bring up today a topic about rules in jiu-jitsu and how a simple change in a rule could change the entire way that we see the wrestling play out. So wrestling, standing on your feet in jiu-jitsu. So currently, right now, there's not any real like stalling uh, enforcement. So yes, they'll have negative points on the other guy, but there's not like any serious consequences to it. I mean, other than losing points, there's not a serious consequence in that like you will get disqualified. So in wrestling in folk style, if you stall 5 times, you're disqualified. So it's stalling a warning, stalling 1 point, stalling another point, stalling 2 points, right? So now I've already got 4 points on him, right? And then the fifth time, he's disqualified. And I mean, and it can happen fast if a guy's not engaging and he's backing up, which is what we see in jiu-jitsu, right? This is why I think the collar tie battles look the way that they do, is because a guy's trying to get the other guy to engage and he can't get a hold of him and do anything because he's just backing up, and then backing out of bounds. Okay, so what am I proposing? Um, I'm not proposing that we do the current out of bounds points that are in wrestling. I actually hate them. I really hate them. I think that they're abused, and I think it's like turning into sumo, right? Where like a guy might just push you out of bounds and get a step out point, get a point, right, for just your foot going out, or pick up a single leg and just push you out of bounds. I'm not a huge fan of that shit. But I am a fan of when I was wrestling, we had what's called the zone rules. So if you see a wrestling circle, right, there was a circle inside that circle, and that was called the zone. And you can still see a lot of freestyle and Greco wrestling mats that actually have that space, right? That was the zone. And in wrestling, you have 2 colored singlets, blue and red, right? And most of the time we would actually have reversible singlets. So one match I might wrestle and I saw the bout sheet and it says I'm red. Next time I could come out and switch it and reverse it, right? So you know what color you are before you step on the mat. So that way the ref can call to you what's going on and you better listen to them. So let's say that I'm pushing somebody and they're not pushing me back. And let's say that I'm red and I'm pushing them and he'll say to that person when they start entering the zone blue, zone blue. And that person has to try to circle back in bounds. If they don't, then they might just warn him, but then they may actually, back in my day, they'd hit him for passive, which is he's being passive, he's stalling, and they will put him, it's not always, I remember it was pretty subjective, but they would put him down. And it's like he starts off in a loose turtle position, right? And then your hands are like this, and then you lower your hands, and then the ref blows the whistle when you touch his back. And then in freestyle and Greco, he would try to bail out to deny the gut wrench. But imagine in jujitsu if you start people off that way. Can you imagine that shit? And then you get back position. You get to start on somebody's back. Hell yeah, that would change everything because now all of a sudden you would start wrestling pretty hard because if you get hit for stalling, your ass goes down. Okay, that's one, and this could be solved just by using the zone rule. Okay, now, you can't, and the best part about the zone rule is you can't abuse it like you can abuse the current system. In the current system, what people are doing is they're using like the Iranian underhook to push people out of bounds and get a step out point. Okay, the real Iranian underhook, not this bullshit where people's heads are all pulled out of position. That's not the Iranian underhook. And if you don't know the difference between the Iranian underhook and what I'm talking about, then you probably shouldn't argue with me about it. And I get a lot of people who try to argue with me about it. I'm like, that's not the Iranian underhook. If you watch people who know how to use the Iranian underhook well, their fucking head is not way out of position. Okay, what they're doing is they're driving people often with their chest and the shoulder, and they're lifting up high, right? So this guy's way out of position, and they're pushing him to the out of bounds, and he has a choice to make. I get pushed out of bounds and lose a point, or I push back. But if he pushes back, what happens is they get out of the way, right, and do a throw by. So you get out of the way, right, when he pushes back, and then now, or he pushes back and he drops down to a far side double. Either way, what's happening is that's abuse of using the step out, right? I'm not suggesting that we abuse the step out. Because back in my day, if I was pushing somebody to the out of bounds, and I remember I'm red in this case, right? I'm pushing to the out of bounds, they'll say zone red, because I'm not letting that guy wrestle. If he's trying to make an effort to get back in bounds and I'm not letting him, back in my day with the zones, then they might actually call me for passive, because it's like, you're not wrestling this guy. You're not letting him wrestle. You're burning the clock. Okay. And so, because actually back then it was a running clock, like a running time. So even when you went out of bounds, they didn't blow a whistle. Speaking of which, for the love of God, we need whistles in jiu-jitsu. This yelling at people to stop while they're wrestling. Not everybody speaks English, bro. Like this sport's going to get big, and you need a whistle, which is universal language. Okay. So just digress for a second, but fuck, man, get a whistle for the love of God. It's not that hard. So and we switch now, if we shift to our focus to having these zone rules, imagine what'll happen, right? You're not allowed to run out of bounds. You're not allowed to just, imagine if somebody gets a single leg and you try to pull them out of bounds, you're passive. You're fucking going down now. You're going into loose turtle. Can you imagine that? That would be awesome. That would change the sport fundamentally. You stall 5 times, you're fucking out of here. If you don't want to wrestle, you don't want to do jujitsu, then get off the mat. And that might be the way that they start doing it. Now imagine we could change a bunch of different rules in terms of being like, is somebody trying to actually do anything from guard, right? Like, because you're supposed to try to, in wrestling, you're supposed to try to move towards the pin, right? That's what you're always trying to do. Whereas in jujitsu, like, you're always supposed to be trying to move towards the submission. So if you're not trying to submit anybody, then what are you doing out there, And so I think if they make it so that it's like, my job is to try to get your ass to the ground so that then I can try to submit you. Well, then we make rules to make the action better, because this is something that freestyle wrestling, Greco wrestling, and judo fixed a long time ago, which is like, if guys are too cautious to try to score, then it's going to be boring as shit for everybody to watch, right? And there is the United World Wrestling has a grappling rule set, and it's very complicated. If you look it up online, I'll put a link in there for the United World Wrestling grappling rule set. So it's under that wrestling thing umbrella, but it's a grappling rule set. And it's kind of like a combination between freestyle wrestling, judo-ish kind of, and jiu-jitsu. And they do have like an actual step out point if you're not attempting to come back in bounds. If you're not attempting to push back, then they'll actually hit that guy with a point. You can make changes by voicing your opinion, I believe. And right now, people are complaining that the wrestling in jiu-jitsu is boring. The reason that wrestling is boring in jiu-jitsu is because you're not wrestling back, right? Like, wrestling starts when you push back. That's what Andy Saris, my coach, always used to say. Like, if he's not pushing you back, then he's not trying to get a reaction out of you. And if he's not trying to get a reaction out of you, then he's not wrestling you, right? And so it's really hard, right, to do jujitsu against somebody who's just doing this. You ever go against anybody who just is just going to lay there and play dead man? Like, it's kind of hard to do jujitsu against them, right? Because they're not playing the game. And so it is one way to do it, right? But it's stalling. Everybody knows that. So anyway, that's just my take on it, right? Like, zone rules could change fundamentally how we do this, and it would solve this problem of like people fucking wrestling out on concrete and going to get hurt, dude. Because like those big places where they like rent out to do these matches, like, that's concrete under that thin little piece of carpet. Somebody's going to get really, really hurt, and then now all of a sudden jiu-jitsu is going to look really, really bad. There's a reason why in wrestling they want to enforce the rules to the center of the mat, because the mat's the safest place to do this hardcore grappling. Okay, so anyway, this is my thoughts on it. I want to know what other people have to think about it. So if you have something to say, leave a comment, hit the like and subscribe button. If you like the content and want to hear more. But I just kind of want to see where people are on this because I get that pulling guard is a legitimate thing, dude. I wrestle or I do jujitsu in the gi, and I think pulling guard in the gi actually has a lot of utility because I can keep somebody down there, right? By holding on to that lapel. And when the older you get, you keep your hand strength, right? So like I don't let go of that thing. And so I have a lot of hand strength. So when I pull guard, in the room that we were in, it was like a lot of people in there and you couldn't always stand up. And in that case, like, why not? We're trying to do jujitsu and I pull people to the ground. But in the no-gi, it's a little different. You don't have the same kind of control. And I believe that's why the leg locking sequences and everything got really popular. But I think we need to have more action to have more eyeballs on the sport. And one way that we can have more eyeballs on the sport is by having it be more, spectator worthy, right? And collar tying each other back and forth off the fucking out of bounds ain't going to cut it, like for spectator wise. And then butt scooting isn't going to do it either. Okay. And so while there are some rule sets like the United World Grappling rule set that if you pull guard, you get hit for penalties or whatever, and that's fine if you can still make it happen. But I think they stand you back up if nothing's happening from guards. So that's a whole other thing. So anyway, let me know what you think and if you have any thoughts on rule changes, what you would like to see in jiu-jitsu. There's no right answer to this, okay? Like, I just want to hear what people have to say. And thanks for tuning in. Until next time, thanks for watching.